What would 12-year-old you never believe about adult you? We never got that growth spurt we were promised. That sometimes, when I'm not paying attention, my mom's cis words slipped right out of my mouth. That I do math for a living. Ducking math. He'd have been so upset. Edit. Wow. Did not expect so many replies to this of all posts. Must be a lot of accidental mathematicians out there. I should have been more specific. I'm a financial analyst. So I play with numbers and spreadsheets and that kind of stuff all day. So not even the cool kind of math that helps us get into space or anything. More like, yeah. Last year we spent 45% more on LaCra for The Office than in the previous year. So, maybe less LaCra this year? Edit 2. For more clarity, all I ever wanted to be was a musician. Even went to school for music. Still play pretty much every day. Just never made a living from it. So I went from rock and roll to profit and loss, as it were. For almost 9 years, I've worked literally 1 minute away from a huge water park and I've never gone there. That, I too, don't know what the duck I'm doing with my life. That I'm almost 40 and still don't have a stable full of horses. I live in a whole ass other country and speak another language now. That definitely would have come as a surprise. That I own an ice cream shop. Edit. Holy cow. I posted my response, went to bed, and woke up to this blowing up. I will also add that because of my ice cream shop I was a contestant on Chopped. 12-year-old me would be even more shocked by that. How I would feel about Jeff. Jeff was a really big deal in middle school. We went to different elementary schools so I never even heard of him prior to middle school, but as soon as I got to middle school his name was going around the school a lot and it became clear he was a big deal. Jeff was the toughest guy in our grade, the most athletic, the best looking, and the coolest according to both the guys and the girls. The guys wanted to be his friend and if they weren't then they were wary of him because of how tough he was and he gave off that vibe that he wasn't someone to make angry. All the girls loved him and he was making out with girls and going out with them all the time. He even went out with at least 2 girls a year ahead of us in school and one of them was the most popular girl in her grade. This was basically unheard of but he did it. He was in my class in the 6th grade and it became pretty clear that despite his coolness, toughness, and ability with the girls at a young age, Jeff had some problems and couldn't control himself that well. He would act out in funny ways by causing mischief and trouble, but he would also act out in less funny yet troubling ways by doing things like smoking cigarettes on school grounds with other troubled kids, and he would occasionally get physical with any guy dumb enough to piss him off. Because of this, he got detentions and suspensions. That year our class had a field trip to some place that I don't remember, but I do remember the bus ride to and from the trip. Jeff and I were on the same bus and for some reason still unknown to me he decided to sit next to me. On the way there he was talking to me about different things, and since I thought he was a bully and tough and I was afraid of him, I just was nice and would listen and then follow up with questions and try to interact with him, and he seemed to be cool with that. Then at some point he started talking about his home life and his dad, and he said that his dad would hit him upside the head. When he told me this he had his eyes averted and sort of looking down, and he said it kind of like it was a joke, but I could tell that he was upset by it and was trying to play it off cool and by acting like it wasn't some big deal. On the bus ride back to school we stopped at some place and there were these vending machines that some kids were getting snacks out of. I went to get myself a snack and a drink and I got my drink, but something happened when I tried to get my snack. I can't remember what it was exactly. It may have been that I thought I had more money than I did, and when I went to get my snack I came up short for money. Or it could have been that the machine ate my money. Whatever happened, I couldn't get my snack and I was upset because I was pretty hungry. Without asking him or saying anything, Jeff just stepped in front of me and said I got you, and put $1 in the machine for me so I could get my snack. Then we sat next to each other on the way back to school after that. At some point during that year we had a substitute teacher for our class and some kids were acting out and I was laughing because it was funny. Our substitute was a middle-aged woman and she was not happy at all. She was yelling at us to shut up and knock it off, and she physically grabbed me by the shoulders and then started pushing me downward into my chair and desk, and I was frightened by it. I was scared and didn't know what to do, and she was hurting me. When class ended, Jeff grabbed me by the arm and said, "Come on, we're going to the office," and he basically pushed me and pulled me down the hallway to the principal's office. I wasn't going to say no to the guy in a million years because I was afraid of him. We get to the office and he does all the talking and tells the principal what happened while I just sit there in silence, nodding each time that the principal asks me if what Jeff is saying is true. See, the principal had and would go on to have numerous run-ins and issues with Jeff because Jeff could not behave and kept getting into trouble way too often. The principal was wary of him and didn't trust him much, and I suppose he had good reason not to. However, I still remember the concerned look on his face when Jeff was telling him what happened. When Jeff was done talking, we left the office and the principal said he'll look into the incident, and that's all I remember. I figured that Jeff was just using me to act out and cause trouble or give the principal a headache in having to deal with him yet again. I was too afraid of Jeff to say to him that I didn't want to go to the office, so what happened, and that was that. Jeff was expelled from school early in the 8th grade. Word spread around the school quickly because the kid was such a big deal. I don't remember why he got kicked out exactly or what the final straw was. He basically disappeared in 2003 and I never saw him again. Or so I thought. He was off my radar for years, and I had heard that he got kicked out of his second school after he got kicked out of ours, and then in high school he got kicked out of a Catholic school and then wound up at a pretty crappy public school. I didn't know at the time whether he even finished high school or not. In the fall of 2007 I was a senior in high school and I was hanging around at a friend's house after a party ended on the weekend. Seemingly out of nowhere, Jeff shows up with a guy I used to be friends with in earlier years. I hadn't seen Jeff since 2003. He was still big, looked about 6'3", and still had that kind of socially and physically dominant way about him. He was joking around with the guy he came with and he playfully pushed him on the shoulder after making a joke, and the guy almost lost his balance and fell over. Jeff just couldn't help it. Being the alpha male and dominant is how he always was. I was sitting on the couch with my friend and the guy who hosted the party, and then the guy who almost got pushed over smiled at Jeff a bit and said, "You remember, insert my name here," and Jeff stared at me for a few seconds. I definitely didn't look exactly like I did in middle school, but he stepped closer to me and looked me in the eyes and put his hand out to shake my hand but didn't say anything to me. Then he went back to drinking the beer he had and joking around. That's the last time I saw him before he died. Jeff died a few years ago. I think from a drug overdose. Heroin probably. He was 27. I determined that at some point his father, who was abusive and likely violent with him when he was a kid, left the family. Likely when Jeff was about 15 or 16. It looked like Jeff and his mom and little sister had to leave our town and they wound up in a crummier, more rundown area. He fell into the druggy crowd in later years after he was kicked out of middle school, and I suppose this shouldn't have been surprising because his older brother overdosed on heroin and died when me and Jeff were in the 7th grade. I remember that going around the school at the time and people talking about it in whispers. It took me until I was 30 years old to put my brief yet meaningful moments with Jeff together. I went my whole life thinking that he was the school bully and I was afraid of him, yet I realized eventually that I never saw him bully anyone and that he never bullied me. I remembered our time on the bus together and our trip to the office, but I couldn't connect the dots at the time. Now I realize that on the bus, Jeff was grateful that I listened to him talk about his dad hitting him, and because I was nice and good to him. When I needed help at the vending machines he had my back. No questions asked. When our substitute teacher did what she did to me, I later realized that this happened after the bus trip and vending machines day, because I was nice and good to him. When he saw what the teacher did to me, he didn't decide to use me as a way to act out and start trouble. He was just trying to help me because he apparently cared and was concerned. When I saw him after that party was over in high school, he truly did remember me, and he remembered those moments we had together where we had each other's backs in the 6th grade. He could have just said what's up when the other guy asked him if he remembered me, but instead of that he moved towards me and shook my hand, because even after years of having nothing to do with each other, those 6th grade memories came back to him that night, but not to me at the time. At 30, I put it all together. I'm truly sad that he's gone, and when we were kids I would have never thought that I would say that about him, feel that way about him, or that he would die young. The guy was the biggest deal and the last person I would have thought wouldn't make it in life, but sadly his demons and troubles took him away. Once I understood Jeff, I began thinking of him as a legend of my childhood. Recently I realized that calling Jeff a legend, while accurate and true, doesn't truly explain and express what he means to me. In a life filled with much hurt and pain doled out to me by the people whom I used to call friends and family, as well as abuse dished out by others out there, Jeff is one of the only people whose friendship, goodness, and memory is not tainted by time and by how people eventually began to treat me over time. All that he ever was good to me, respectful, kind, decent, caring, supportive, fearless, empathetic, friendly, and true. He was never anything bad to me for as long as I knew him, and he's the best friend that I never had. That's why calling him a legend doesn't quite express what he is to me all these years later. He's not a legend, he's my hero. I actually like exercise and physical activity. It's just pay class that sucked. That I found a girl that buys me Star Wars Lego at Christmas. That the brother I hated would become my best friend. Edit. Damn. Left this comment before bed. Came back to this. Thank you all for the awards. Lol, this never happens to me on here. Warms my lil heart to see so many people with a lot of love for their brothers. That I haven't gotten married. That's something I just assumed would happen, and yet here we are and I'm still single. I think he'd also be surprised at how rough my teenage years were. That my father would die young. Both of his parents lived well into their 90s. He was athletic, non-smoker, not a risk taker. He also turned out to be the only one in his family to get cancer, a particularly deadly type. Hey, you know that girl over there you think is really weird? You're going to marry her. That all of the things I said I'd always remember and never do as an adult, I've largely forgotten and probably do as an adult. That I actually like bees now and want to pursue beekeeping someday. I used to hate all bugs no matter what, but with more research, I realized that bees aren't so bad. Still hate other bugs though. That I'm in bed usually by 8:45 every night, to sleep high. That I still laugh at the exact same things. That I have a kid taller than me. I'm not tall or anything, just never pictured being shorter than my 13-year-old. How little I've accomplished. How many emotions were cancelled. I'd still sit down for an all-night session of Dungeons and Dragons. I made it to 21. My D never grew. That I've heard a pilot scream "Mayday, Mayday" before ejecting. I'm an air traffic controller. That I would be answering a hypothetical question about my 12-year-old self on an internet forum using my phone. How big my tits are. That he would become a scientist after all. Being a dirt floor poor country kid seemed unsurmountable at the time. 12-year-old me would put a beat down on me for dropping out of college and smoking weed every day. 12-year-old me was also probably in better shape and would easily win that fight. We never achieved that swan status. Still an ugly duckling. She has friends. Good, supportive, long-term friends. Guess what? You're gay. That the only thing preventing me from ending it is my dogs. Then he'd be totally stoked I have dogs. Edit. Guys, I'm fine. Even after they go I'll probably keep going mostly out of spite. That I learned how to prioritize myself, and I'm not responsible for upholding anybody else's well-being or happiness anymore. Thanks for my first awards, friends. Also, somebody down the chain asked me to elaborate, so here you go, if you're curious. Trigger warning, hella childhood abuse. So it was actually due to the responsibilities I had my whole life. 1. Firstborn to a single mother who was tormented and hindered by her own mental illness. 2. Little brother born with autism. I took care of the majority of his needs from a very young age. One of my earliest memories is taking care of my younger siblings alone for an indeterminate period of time when I was 4 and they were 2. We were left alone a lot. 3. Because of my mom's struggles she didn't work. So the constant threat of freezing to death, dehydrating to death, starving to death was a fear she instilled in me when I was 6. 4. This is also around the time I was being molested. I didn't understand what was happening but I could tell he was lonely and I wanted to help him. Pathetic. I know, it was made very clear that I was not to tell anybody about all of this. 5. I started working my first job cash under the table at age 12. Throughout the rest of my teens I was working upwards of 3 jobs at a time. The jobs I worked were largely at and I was absolutely taken advantage of financially. I'd get paid sometimes as low as $2.03/hour, but I was so desperate I took the jobs anyways. 6. Not for nothing, but I also had to maintain perfect grades to keep up appearances. Thank God these perfect grades and spotless record secured me a full ride, need-based financial aid FTW, to my dream school, TLDR. Mom was crazy abusive. Other people in my life were crazy abusive. Little brother needed me. I had to parent myself, my mother, and my younger siblings, all while acing school and financially supporting us. The payoff was great when I finally got the duck away from them at 18 and got into therapy at 19. It got really dark before they got better. Now I'm happy, healthy and safe. Also, shockingly, nobody died when I wasn't there to hold everyone together. Go figure. He'd be blown away that I'm writing professionally now. That I'm marrying the girl I had a crush on then. That I can run 6 entire miles. Run the whole thing without stopping once. I still can't believe it sometimes. The human body is amazing. That I'm on my way to becoming a doctor. 12-year-old me would scream why. Rant about how doctors are the scariest beings ever and how the hospital drives you nuts. 12-year-old me really wanted to be a pilot. That I'm overweight and I became a suit. That I would be a firefighter. Yeah dude, you get to ride in the truck. Let's see. 1. That I actually did the things like get into a good college, graduate, and get a good job. 2. That I smoked cigarettes for a while, few years in college and after. Pretty weird out of character. 3. That I have a wife and 2 on-purpose children at age 32. 4. That my household income is as high right now as my parents ever was. They really wouldn't believe that, which tells you everything you need to know about them. That I'm a virgin in my 30s and live with my parents. That I travel the world for a living. My 12-year-old me would never believe both my biological parents are dead. Although from the father she would have expected it, but sadly mother died earlier. She wouldn't also believe that I've made it to 40 years old, because 12-year-old me always said that I wouldn't make it to my 30th year, and that I've gotten into 2 fights with a brain tumor and won them for so far. I'm sorry 12-year-old me, I just want to live, just to prove some people wrong. To prove them, yes I am worthy, yes I can. Am I a stubborn person? Well hell yeah, I'm in there for the long run. Edit. Wow. Never have I thought this would blow up as it did. Thank you for the awards kind strangers, and also for the kind answers on this post. It's much appreciated. That I made it all 50 states. I know, kind of boring. That I would become a heroin addict. I got my it together now. Got close to a year clean, but still man. Strange and dark times. Edit. Thank you so much to everyone who replied and gave awards. It means the world to me. I'm trying to stay clean, but battling a psychotic mental illness makes it difficult as duck. Obviously lol. But these replies keep me going when nothing else does sometimes. Thanks again. That my husband to be and my dad, who's from Sinaloa, Mexico, would shake hands. I was pretty terrified about being into guys as a Latino male at 12. And even more terrified that my super conservative parents' family would find out. After a while I just said duck it, and let my fam choose if they wanted to be a part of my life. Luckily I was pleasantly surprised. That I'm still alive. 12-year-old me was suicidal depressed. Still am. Hoping I will get better eventually, but it's been 23 years and hasn't gotten better yet. I did drugs. That I did, in fact, go on a date with a boy and get married to one. And also that I'm bisexual. I think my 12-year-old self would be more surprised about that first thing. I'm 25 and still haven't bought myself a RC car toy like I promised myself before. Sorry kiddo, you didn't make it as a pro wrestler, and you realized being a musician wouldn't pay the bills either. Lived with a couple strippers. A couple different times. That my political and religious views have changed. 18-year-old me would have been just as surprised. Edit. In case anyone is interested. I didn't expect this comment to cause a lot of discussion. Here's more info. I used to be extremely conservative. I still remember being a freshman in college and sticking out for it. I was definitely homophobic. As I went through college I slowly realized that I had been brainwashed into hating people and things. I had Muslim, gay, and liberal friends. My biggest revelation was breaking free of the identity politics that plagued my childhood. I voted for Trump in 2016 and it wasn't too long before I realized the mistake I made. I consider myself a moderate now, and I like to think I can see through the BS that politicians sling around. More recently, I have abandoned Christianity. I was never a huge participatory Christian, but COVID really tested my faith. I saw so many Christians turn themselves toward prayer and healing rather than masks and quarantine. It got to the point where it felt like everyone was actively brainwashing themselves with hokey mythology nonsense. I live in the Bible Belt and it's unlikely that I'll ever be able to come out about it. My career would be damaged by people thinking I was an evil atheist. When I was not 12 but 13, I got this crazy idea. I dreamed of someday loading a bunch of camping gear onto my bicycle and disappearing for a year or so to ride around the country. Also when I was 13, I started to see signs of trouble in my family. When I was 17, those family troubles would culminate in my parents' divorce. And when I was 20 years old, I would finally set off on that bike camping trip I dreamed of for so long. So 13-year-old me would be super stoked to hear that the bike trip actually happened. And he wouldn't be entirely surprised about the divorce and its lingering effects to this day. But 12-year-old me, yeah, he has absolutely no idea what's coming. That I wanted to kill myself lol. How many tattoos I have. Back then I never thought I'd get any. That I still like nerdy stuff. I look like the total opposite of the kind of guy who would. How much of a disappointing piece of human trash I am. That I'm not some super successful rich smart doctor scientist with a Nobel Prize and a bright future ahead of me like every adult told me I would be. That all those friends and family don't stick around as you get older. That I never became the first man on Mars. That was always my plan, I guess. Technically, I could still be the first. I'm a lesbo. You're still alive at 30 and your boyfriend will be killed. Life is wild and hurtful but you made it this far.